me a little about this new beginning, this time to start here for I think is your first overseas assignment, yeah?
It is.
Interesting,
It
yeah.
is, it is.
So how it is to have a new beginning now?
Well, it is my first overseas assignment, but I have been to Africa
Many times.
probably 38 times.
I see.
And I have visited more than 30 countries on the continent.
Oh, incredible.
Because in each part of my 40 years of ministry, I have found business to come here. Like, for example, my first time here, I was a pastor in Dayton, Ohio.
Oh, that lovely.
It was there that I always wanted to go to Africa. In fact, I put a big map of Africa on the wall in my bedroom saying, Lord, I want to go to Africa. I want to go to the motherland. I want to go there. Gweru, Zimbabwe. So I did that. We had a wonderful meeting there. And really, it's interesting that just recently, in the last couple weeks, some of the students are here right now at AUA. Their wife was baptized in my meeting in Gweru, Zimbabwe. So I said, this is really wonderful. So that was my first time then when I was a pastor. But then later, when I was editor of Message magazine, I started a program called Message to Africa. And what we would do is we would get African writers, even though it was a black Seventh Adventist magazine, the Review and Herald Publishing Association in Hagerstown, we'd get African writers, and then what we would do is ship like about 300,000 copies of each issue to Africa. So that was then. And then after I left Messenger magazine, I was temporarily at the White Estate, the White Estate at the General Conference. General Conference for about a year or so.
I see.
And even there, I worked very closely with topics as it related to Ellen White and black people in the South, and just really people of color around the world.
Interesting, yeah.
So, but then I only stayed a short period of time because Lynn Behrens from Loma Linda University called and asked me, would I come and spend time with Loma Linda? So,
that
long
also
story
gave
short,
you the opportunity to travel to Africa while at Loma Linda?
At Loma Linda, I did. I did there as well. I did many trips then. Then after Loma Linda, I went directly to Oakwood. And the 14 years at Oakwood, I must have been to Africa. It's got to be probably 10 times during that period. So at each point in my ministry, I came here. So anyway, that gets to the starting point. So after all of that, after Oakwood, I went to the General Conference for 5 years. And so I stayed there. And so after the GC, my wife and I figured that of all the places, where would we like to go after the General Conference? And we had many options. But the appeal of Africa and the Adventist University of Africa had a special calling to us.
Yeah, but you told me briefly that you had some story about this place, this very place.
True.
Yeah, share that with us.
My wife and I were visiting in here on the continent, doing some workshops and some meetings. We were in Nairobi, and then we heard about the dream that Jan Paulson and Matthew Bediako and Bob Lemon, and at this time Jeffrey Mwana, you even had Blastus Riguri, you had a number of leaders who had this dream of starting a seminary on the continent. So I said, this is so intriguing, and I was so much involved in that. So we said, what we want to do is we want to go visit the site. So it was in 2004, 2005.
At that time, you were at Oakwood.
I was at Oakwood,
the
president of
Oakwood.
We drove from Nairobi here, and at that time it was Maxwell was here, but it was the Maasai people around, and they were just doing the division offices and so forth. And so I went to the site where the administration block is right now with AUA. We stood there, and I looked at that place, and I told my wife, I said, if there was one place I would leave Oakwood University for to come, I would like to come to this experiment.
Fantastic.
And little did I know, just 11, 12 years later, I would be here. So my ministry has always been caught up with Africa. And even in 1988, Neil Wilson was president of the General Conference. And he had a dream to have the annual council for the first time on the continent of Africa.
It didn't happen, yeah?
No, it did. It did in Nairobi. So in 1988, Neil Wilson being president, so he asked me to do a special study of the Adventist work in Africa. I did a magazine when I was the editor of Message magazine. And then he also asked me to write a book about the life of Samson Kaseka, who was the Seventh Adventist Prime Minister of Uganda. And we called it From Exile to Prime Minister. And so I wrote that book. And so in 1988, I had the big meeting there. And before that meeting, Neil Wilson, Ted Wilson, William Johnson, and myself, Delbert Baker, and two others, we climbed Mount Kilimanjaro.
Fantastic.
We climbed Mount Kilimanjaro before the annual council setting in Nairobi. So I'm saying all that to say my starting point at AUA has been so many times here to the continent.
Yes,
But when I was in my transition period,
yes,
trying to decide what am I going to do at this point, I had a number of options in the United States, and then I also had a couple overseas offers.
assignments, yeah.
In fact, the North American division almost thought I was going to take one. They kind of quasi-announced it, but they said, you know, this school, Brimpong and Twee had done a great job here as the vice chancellor. He had decided to leave, and so they said, would you consider this? Well, so I said, yes. I remember in that time many years ago that I said I might come back here. And long story short, when the board voted in November of last year to give me the invitation, after a period of prayer, I mean, we said we want to do it, but I must confess, Andre, it was a decision because come on, I had to leave the United States, I had to leave my home, everything I knew, and move to another country.
Yes.
But my wife and I said, this is what the Lord is leading.
Yeah.
I'm a strong man that believes in providence.
Yes.
Providence meaning the guidance of God in everything we do. And so I said, Lord, we prayed about it. We said, you must be in this. And that was my starting point at AUA. And I've come here, and the people have been so receptive. The ECD and Maxwell, as well as all the faculty and staff at AUA, we are convinced now, a little less than having been here a year, we're convinced that God, in His plan, worked it out for us to be here.
Wonderful. As we speak on this new starting point for you, what is your dream for this university? What are your main objectives for the time you will be here?
Well, I recall when I went to Oakwood many years ago. It was 1996 when I first went there. People would ask me, they said, what is your vision, Baker?
Yes.
They said, what is your vision for Oakwood? And I learned then, Pastor, like I know now, I learned to not come to a vision quickly. Not to be too fast. So in coming here to AUA, to answer your question, to come here to AUA, my goal is to look, listen, learn, and then lead.
I see.
So I have made it a point coming here to just look at everything, just like Nehemiah did when he looked at the walls in the book of Nehemiah. To look and to listen to people, talk to them.
Yes.
I've sat down and I've talked to every faculty member, every staff member, no matter what their position is. I've talked with all the university council members, the officers here at ECD, even Maxwell. I talked to the principal, Mark Nelson. I've talked to everyone just to say, what do you see? I mean, how do you see the school? What are some of the unique needs and challenges and opportunities? And everyone has been very kind and they've been very helpful in terms of giving me information. So now I'm at a point now where I can better kind of begin to conceptualize. Just last week, we had a one-day retreat. We went to the Nairobi Wildlife Park, and we spent all day just brainstorming about what do the members, faculty, and staff see for the school. And I can now say that we have kind of a growing vision that's taking shape and coming more clear in my mind. But rather than trying to say exactly, I'll say it like this. We have a number of values. Like one thing, a first priority of mine is to really build relationships. So I'd like AUA to be one of the best places a person can work. So the faculty and staff would really enjoy working with one another. It'd be a place where Christ is exalted, where students, when they come into our campus, they'll sense that this is a special place because of relationships. I want to raise money for the school. Already, God has, in some rather remarkable ways, given, I can recall one friend of mine who is a friend in the United States, and I went to them and I told them I'm coming to AUA, and so I said, I'd like to drop by your home. This is an older white couple in the South, and I said, I'd like to come by your home. They were donors of ours at Oakwood, so we'd like to come by and just talk to you about AUA. Pastor, you wouldn't believe it. I went by their home, I never forget, it was a Sunday. And my wife and I, we sat down, I was here, my wife was here, the wife was there, and then the husband was there. And so I had my little computer and showing the PowerPoint and telling about AUA. So I get to the end of the presentation. I told him we wanted to build scholarships. We wanted to do outreach in this area. And so he says, well, what can we do for you? and I was a little surprised that he was so open. I mean, I thought,
off guard.
yeah, he had given before, he had helped me before, but I figured maybe I'll just ask him for a little small amount or something. But I saw God was leading. God was leading.
So that was before coming here.
Oh no, I'd already accepted. So this is this was in April of this year.
This year.
So
So you have already been here.
Yeah, recent. And so I said to him, I said, well, I gave a large figure. And so his wife, who was sitting next to me, I'll never forget, she's a wonderful lady. They're over 80.
Oh.
They're over 80 years of age. And so she said, oh, Dr. Baker, she said, my husband gives me a little money that I can give to worthy projects. I like this project.
Oh.
She says, I'll go write you a check for $100,000 right now.
Oh my.
And so she jumps up and she runs to get her checkbook. And her husband, I said, they want to remain anonymous. That's why I'm not saying their names.
Of course.
But her husband said, well, I had said maybe you can give so much per year over the 5 years, so I'm here for a 5-year term, so maybe so much per year. And so then he listens, and he says, well, Delbert, I don't make commitments like I did before. He said, at my age, I don't. He says, but what if I write you a check today for $500,000?
Wow, $500,000.
He said, $500,000. He said, what if I, and I was like, oh my God, praise God, praise God. Yes, like, what a wonderful blessing. And then he did it, he did it. And so I thought maybe when I had the 2 checks here, and I left the house, and this is the first time I said it publicly in a setting like this, but I've announced it to our boards and whatever, but
Sure.
I think this is a blessing that shows that God is involved in the program. So my wife and I, we left the house, had a wonderful visit, had prayer with them, and I got out, I stopped by the side of the road, and we had a praise service. We thanked the Lord for it. And then I reached in my pocket, and I pulled out to be sure that the checks were really what they really were. It was true. They were absolutely legitimate, and so we've been able to establish the student scholarship program. And we've been able to we're planning to do some outreach work here, and we have most of it's going in scholarships because we want to be able, Pastor, to bring students to AUA who are from countries that are not represented here.
I see.
We have about 30-some countries that are represented at AUA, have about 20-something who are not on the continent. So we want to sponsor some of the students to come, and we want to help non-sponsored students. Most of the students at AUA have sponsorships
by
from
the organizations.
the unions and the conferences and so forth, the division, but some are not. So that's what we established it for, and the people were very, very gracious. So that's just an example. So relationships, resources, but then also we have a real desire to establish the infrastructure, to make a tight working infrastructure. It's a new school. It's only 10 years old.
Only 10 years old?
Only 10 years old.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, it's only 10 years old. Started in 2006, and this is the 10th anniversary this year.
Yeah.
In fact, the ECD is allowing us to have our celebration weekend at their year-end meeting in October.
To have all the representatives here.
October 28 to 30 in that period. So infrastructure, then we also want to do some assertive, aggressive work with online education.
Wonderful.
Because really build that.
Yeah, so much, much more practical, especially for this continent.
Potential's great.
Yeah.
In light of the fact that AUA is for all 3 divisions on the continent.
Yes.
So maybe people can't be here, but if we have a good, strong website and online education program, they can do a lot of interaction from where they are.
Sure.
So that's it. And then we want to develop programs and new education programs, like academic programs. Like we're looking at right now a PhD in leadership. This is a real big deal. And because AUA only offers graduate programs.
Yeah, it is good you mentioned that this is just for graduate and postgraduate.
No undergrad.
Yes.
So master's and DMin program and PhD. So this is another big thing we have here in terms of the vision for AUA. This is something that is in process. And I'm happy again to build on the work of Dr. Antwi, Owusu Antwi, and to take it to the next level.
Yes.
And then I would say probably the next final thing I'd mention would be that we have a real desire to, within reason, without debt, to expand the campus. And fortunately, we're in a place where we have the other entities around us, but there's a great need, for example, like a church. They have a new church that just formed in February this year. It's called the Advent Hill University Church.
Wonderful.
In fact, Pastor Riguri, president of ECD, spoke for that occasion. We want to join in with the division here and the other two divisions, the General Conference and AUA and the local church, and to build a church. To have like a multi-purpose center and the church.
Yes, yes.
And so that, along with just an overall spirit of excellence, we want it to be the best we can be. On the continent, we like it to be a light on a hill, shining on the hill, so people can see it. Right now, we are building a student hostel. You might have seen it on campus. We're building a hostel right now. That's the 4th tower for students to stay when they come here. Then, not far from here, right on the street, in fact, from this media center, we're putting faculty apartments.
More faculty apartments.
Yeah, because see, when the adjunct faculty come, they need a place to stay. We have to have more room for them. So we're growing, and so that's kind of an idea of some of the values and some of the projects we're working on. So God is good, and I think it's the idea that Jan Paulson and now Ted Wilson, the GC presidents, along with their executive officers, came up with is a wonderful idea, because it's all about training men and women for ministry on the continent.
Yes.
And already our graduates, we probably have maybe 450 graduates.
Already, yeah.
Already in the 10 years. Already they're in the GC, they're in the divisions, they're in the unions and conferences and pastors, and so they're making a difference. So I praise God for that.
Wonderful. So your work has been starting under very good conditions
Good, yeah.
and auspicious. Yeah, let's return now to the first starting point.
Okay.
What can you tell us about your family of origins and experience or memories of your early childhood?
Sure. That's great. Okay, well, I'm a native of California in the USA. I grew up there in San Bernardino, Los Angeles area. I was born in Oakland. And so when we were in high school, we wanted to go out of the country for school. And so we went to Jamaica.
Really?
We went to, it was then West Indies College, now it's North Caribbean University. So I went there for a year, and then I came back and I went to Oakwood. And so Oakwood was kind of my place. It was a home away from home. And so I graduated from Oakwood Academy, as well as I graduated from Oakwood College.
Wonderful.
And Calvin Rock was the president then.
Wow.
You may have known, he's retired now.
Of course.
I
had the privilege of translating for him.
Oh, really? Really?
Yes,
Great. He's
yes.
a great friend of ours,
Yeah.
He was the president when the 4 years that I was there.
Yeah.
And it was when I was there that he gave me a real great concept of leadership. And so that was the beginning of the starting point of my dream then at Oakwood, even though I was from California. So after Oakwood, I went to the ministry in Allegheny West Conference.
So excuse
10
me,
years.
how did you, so becoming a pastor was your vision for life?
No.
No?
Initially, I was more interested in law.
Law.
I was interested in being an attorney, and I always had a desire to write and so forth, but and I love to speak and so forth. So law seemed to be a very appealing area to me, but it was in my sophomore year, I felt through a series of not miraculous miracles, but through very special events that happened that gave me the conviction that God was calling me into ministry. And so it was my desire to be a preacher-teacher.
I see.
Not simply a pastor. It was a combination of the two. I see the didactic as well as the proclamation side. So throughout my whole pastorate, I've always preached and taught at the same time, or mixed it together. So from there, and then at Oakwood, I met my wife, Susan Marie Lee then, and she is the love of my life, and she was the one I met at Oakwood. I was senior class president, and so graduation weekend, we got married.
That's, I think that's a pattern here, yeah?
What's that?
I mean, many times after the graduation, those who are ready for marriage, they had their marriage immediately.
Well, yeah, but I think in my case, it was a little...
I heard that again and again.
Did you really?
Yeah, really, yeah.
Well, of course, the awkwardness in my case was, with me being president, and me being married on the very weekend that I was graduating.
Yes.
So we got married on Sabbath evening, and I graduated the next morning, Sunday morning. So I remember walking into the auditorium on that Sunday, and they say, where have you been? We didn't see you at the banquet Saturday night. So I swear, I was just married. I was taking care of business. The whole place erupted into laughter. So that's where we were married. And then my wife is a physical therapist.
Yes.
I went to the seminary, then got my MDiv. She went to Loma Linda and got her master's then.
Is she also a native of California?
No, she's from Chicago, Illinois.
Oh.
Chicago, Illinois, and also she was also spent many years with her family at Oakwood in Huntsville, Alabama. So we did that at the beginning, the seminary in Loma Linda.
Yes.
But then later she went to get her doctorate at Loma Linda in physical therapy, and then I went to get my PhD at Howard University in organizational communication. After I got my MDiv at Andrews.
I think that was quite an innovative area.
Well, yeah. In fact, the person who recommended me to do this is Israel Leto, who's the president of IAD. Okay, he was the one who's in the program. He said, Delbert,
Really?
I told him, he said, I think there's a great program. He said, that's what he was in. He was in the same program. He said, it can complement your ministry. And so really, Pastor, I think the unique thing about how this has helped me in my ministry is organization communication studies how organizations communicate or they don't communicate, and why don't they do this, and what's the dynamic going on. And I found it to be so helpful in every aspect of my ministry to see, because communication is the basis of everything. And the Bible is very much about communicating the word, just spreading the gospel. So it's been a real help to me. Anyway, so we got our degrees, and then my sons, three sons, one got his doctorate in physical therapy like his mother.
Yes.
And then the second got his PhD like me, and he's working at the General Conference now.
Really?
His name is Dr. Benjamin Baker.
Oh, I've seen the name.
Yes.
I don't know the person. I've seen the name, but I didn't make the connection.
He's one of the associates in the archives department. And the interesting thing about what he's doing is he's the managing editor of the new encyclopedia, SD Encyclopedia.
Wow.
They're redoing this in the 5-year period. So he's working with that. And then my younger son is in banking. He's in business in London. He's actually living in London. He's getting married in a couple weeks.
Oh,
so we're going back to the U.S. for the marriage. So anyway, so that was that. But our three sons, throughout our ministry, they've always had a respect for Christian education. We sent them all through school, just like myself. And I did literature evangelism for 5 summers. I'm working my way through school, and all of my sons have done literature evangelism. Really? I made a point that they must learn to do LA
Were they
work.
happy about it?
Well, I don't know if that was my question. It's kind of like sons, your father thinks you need to get do some literature evangelism. So
In
they
what
did.
ways, besides the financial side, in what ways doing literature evangelism had been formative and
Listen, I cannot say enough about literature evangelism, LA work. I think, frankly, that every minister, every teacher, even in healthcare professions, if they spent just a summer or 2 doing literature evangelism, it could transform their lives. You're talking about things like diligence, the ability to diligently do the work of LA. It teaches you resilience. When people are slamming doors in your face on a regular basis, come on. I did it in San Diego, California. It was a hot summer, and summer after summer, or selling magazines, these kinds of things, big books and magazines.
Yes.
Resilience. If people say no, do you give up, or do you come back again and again? And the only way you can be successful in LE work is you got to be resilient. Then I think the whole issue of initiative. This is one of my favorite words. Initiative. The ability to self-motivate. LE work teaches you to self-motivate. And you've got to get yourself up in the morning and kind of get out there to do it, because oftentimes you're almost self-supporting. You're independent.
Sure.
Nobody makes you do it.
Yeah.
And then I think also another trait it teaches you is vision. A sense of, when you're starting off small and you sell 1 set of books, or you have a magazine or 2, and you really don't, you don't know what's going to happen at the end.
Absolutely.
But you're like depending on God, and you have this relationship with God, and He gives you the belief that I will be with you. And so you, by faith, have vision that the end's are going to be good.
Yeah.
And that's really what happened. Every summer, of all 5 summers I did it, I always came through with with the blessing of some kind of a scholarship, and most of the time I got a full scholarship. And last, I would say, LE work teaches you, how should I put it? This is kind of an unusual one, the connection, because I think it teaches you, believe it or not, to have a better regard for health reform and healthful living. Because I found in my work that if I could be balanced with my sleeping habits and my eating habits, I was better and more alert when I would go door to door.
You observed that at that young age.
Yeah, I don't think I understood it all
Of
then
course.
when I was doing it. It was not like I had it all mapped out.
Yeah.
But I noticed that, like if a lot of my friends who, when we do LE work together, we'd have like a team, a group of LEs, and some of them would like stay out late at night and, they wouldn't want to get up in the morning, they'd be tired and exhausted and whatever. But I found that if I followed the basic principles, even Ellen White's 8 natural remedies, even when I was young I realized this because I was in college then, I found that I could do so much better. And it's interesting, those 5 just qualities that I just shared with you have followed me all the way throughout my ministry. Diligence, resilience, initiative, and vision, and this whole issue of energy, excellence, and whatever like that has been with me. So LE work was just wonderful. That's why my sons, I had this little deal I would do with them. I told them, there were 2 of them who were not so inclined to do it. One was willing to do it, 2 were not.
Yeah.
I told them, I said, sons, if you do this, I will make it worth your while. So I was going to actually give them a financial incentive if they would do it.
Yes.
But I wanted them to go through the experience of doing it, and so they did. I'd even do this oftentimes with books and training and parenting. I'd give them a big, thick book I wanted them to read, and I'd say, if you read this, I'll give you $50. But I'll give you a test at the end of it. I'll test you to see what you learn from it. So that, it's kind of working. So I can't say that they love doing it at first, but they did it, all 3 did it, and they tell me to this day, they say, Dad, I'm glad you taught us to do LE work, and they said the things we learned then, they too are using in their lives.
Wonderful, yeah. So you began working as a pastor.
Yes.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. I did 10 years.
10 years.
10 years
so
as a pastor.
you try to blend preaching and teaching. You mean
and evangelism.
Evangelism, teaching from the pulpit, or teaching? Did your churches have a school?
Yeah, a couple of them did.
But you didn't teach in the school.
No, I didn't teach in school.
Yeah.
So when I say I'm talking about a teaching preaching pastor.
Yes.
Yeah, this whole idea, and really the motto. I think the motto is the Apostle Paul. I mean, in the New Testament, he was a great motto of one who mixed together preaching, teaching, and then my idea was to do the work of an evangelist. I never thought that I was an evangelist per se. That was not my calling. But I did the work of it. Like just a couple months ago, I was in Rwanda when they were doing the 2,300 meetings here. I went there. I mean, even though I'm in administration now, I just said I must go there and teach. When I was 5 years, I was in the General Conference. Every single year, I did evangelism around the world. I mean, it was something I did. Even recently, I did when Lubumbashi in the Congo. And the Union President, Robert Mahoney, who is here now working on his DMN program, it was really interesting that I was with him, 3 years ago and was in his area. So the idea of evangelism, complementing teaching, preaching, to me, I think is a wonderful trilogy for pastors and even administrators who can do the work of ministry. So I mixed it in, and I have never regretted it. So even when I was at Oakwood, I would still periodically I would do meetings, and I found that the skills were always very practical.
So you have already briefly outlined your main places where you have worked. So as a pastor, then it was Loma Linda?
No, it was Message Magazine.
Message,
in Hagerstown.
shortly for White Estate, and then Loma
Linda 4 years.
Let's speak a little
and
bit
then
about
Oakwood,
your work at Loma Linda.
Loma Linda.
Yeah, because I think that was also very formative for you.
Well, I'll tell you,
one of the flagship institutions. I mean, as far as health, School of Medicine and health-related careers, this is our flagship institution.
Well, that was really kind of providential too that I went there because I had accepted the call to go to the White Estate. I was the first African American, the first person of color to go there.
Really?
It was just a wonderful privilege to go. Paul Gordon was the director.
Paul Gordon, yes.
Who invited me to come. And so they literally moved me from Hagerstown to Columbia, Maryland, and I was there and meeting with Paul and so forth. And Lynn Behrens asked me to come to Loma Linda. I'd already said no once. I said I could not go. I'd already accepted the call to the White Estate.
Yes.
And I never will forget it. She said, well, Delbert, I know you're from California. She says, will you just come and vision with us? Vision, with it, using it like a verb. And so she said, I know you're living here. Just take the trip, come out. So I did, Pastor, and the rest is history. After I went there, I was intrigued with her dream to create a diversity program at the university.
Excuse me, you were the first to have this responsibility.
That's correct.
So
they had
it
no
was
diversity program.
Pioneering work.
It was
pioneering work.
It was pioneering work, yes.
Yeah, interesting.
Yes. I started the diversity program at Loma Linda.
Very interesting, yeah.
And really in 1992. But it was Lynn's vision. It was Lynn Behrens' vision. One of the greatest privileges of my ministry to work with her. She's retired now in Loma Linda. But Lynn Behrens had a vision of leadership and a compassionate approach to leadership that literally changed my life. It was changed my life. Working with her was one of my greatest privileges. So I went there. I went there, and the rest is history. I had to leave the White Estate, and the hardest thing was going back to Paul Gordon and saying, I decided to go home. He cried. He literally, I remember.
A very tall, very imposing person.
Yeah, it was a very emotional meeting we had, and I felt so bad that I did it. And I've often wondered what would have been like if I had gone to Loma Linda versus going, if I had gone to the White Estate, stayed there versus going to Loma Linda. I don't know, I don't know that I would have gone to Oakwood after that. You know how it is in your life, these things happen?
Yes.
Everybody has it. They have these, what seem to be circumstance or maybe coincidence. But God works through all of these things to do what he ultimately wants you to do. One of my philosophies in ministry and life and discovering a call is a wonderful statement by Francis Buckner, who says that calling happens when your inner gladness links with an outer need.
Wonderful.
So
say it again because it's very deep.
Your calling happens when your inner gladness links with an outer need, the internal to the external. And so when the two get together, what you're passionate about, what you really believe in, and there's a need around you. So then that's a good fit. And that's what happened to me, both at the White Estate, yes, but also at Loma Linda. I just got my PhD. It was brand new. And she was like saying, can you come to this academic institution so you can use it there? And she said, you can even continue to do your L&G White writings and your research, which I actually did. When I was at Loma Linda, I wrote a number of monographs for them. I wrote a couple books, as it related it to the spirit of prophecy. So that was my fit there. That's why I went to Loma Linda. And then from there, I went to Oakwood. And I think that God prepared me for Oakwood by going to Loma Linda.
It was at that time when you did the research on William Foy?
Good. No, actually what happened is I did that at the Review and Herald. So I did that at Review and Herald. What happened was in my last quarter of my time on my MDiv program at Andrews University.
Oh, so it was much earlier.
It was my last quarter there, and they simply said, you have one class to do before you finish all your requirements. And it was a class in Christian biographies, okay? So I said, okay, this is my last class. I must do this thing quickly and be done and move on. And then we'll forget. So they said, you must choose two people to write a report on. And one of them was I wrote on E.E. Cleveland, who's a personal friend, and I had done evangelism with him and C.D. Brooks earlier. So I wrote on E.E. Cleveland, and then the other one was on William Foy. So I said, I know Cleveland very well, so I can easily write on that. And I said, there's not much information on William Foy. I can easily do this. I'll be finished. But when I start reading into William Foy's life, and I remember I wrote to the White Estate for information on information. I did my research. Immediately I realized there was a disconnect. There seemed to be the impression that William Foy, this black man who received visions before Ellen White,
and he rejected the call.
That he rejected.
This is what I knew
thought.
Until I learned about your research. This is what I knew.
That's right.
I think this is very widespread.
Well, I hope it's not as widespread now.
I hope so, but at that time...
At that time it was.
Yeah, it was quite...
but then I realized in studying his life that Ellen White said that she heard him speak as a little girl. She and her father, Robert Harmon, went to hear him in Portland, Maine. So she heard him speak, but Loughborough said that he had died before. John Loughborough in his book on denominational history book. So then immediately I saw there was kind of a disconnect. I said, now how could this be? I mean, how could she hear him? And she said that Loughborough said he rejected. So then I realized basically that Loughborough had made a mistake. And that, and he made a few mistakes. If you read Loughborough's book, he's a good historian and he's good to read, but he did make a number of mistakes in different areas. He wasn't as precise as maybe some of the historians today would have wanted him to be. Once I discovered that, Pastor, that was the beginning of my saga, my journey to discovering the life of William Foy. And it became my cause célèbre to vindicate him and to prove. In my book, The Unknown Prophet, which was published by the Review and Herald in 1987.
And you published a new edition a couple of years ago.
2013 it showed the fact that he did not reject his commission, but he in fact fulfilled it, and that he had a kind of a role like a minor prophet, like Ellen White had a role of a major prophet. Recently, just a couple weeks ago, I presented it to the D-Min students here, that whole story. If someone's interested, they could actually go online and they could Google The Unknown Prophet Baker PDF, and they can download the older version if they want to, or they can buy the new version, either one. But it's a fascinating story, and what people often do, they confuse William Foy with Hazen Foss, who was the relative of Ellen White by marriage, who in fact did reject the message. And he was the one that said he was upset that God didn't come in 1844 like they thought, and he said he wouldn't do it, and then he was the one. Later, he said he refused to do it. The Spirit of God was removed from him.
And he felt like being lost. And
he lived 50 years after that and never showed another interest in religious affairs. So anyway, that's the point. But that's when I did it. It was at the Review. But after the Review and Herald Publishing Association, when I wrote the Foy book, then I went to Loma Linda, to E.G. White Estate, Loma Linda, and then Oakwood. So.
And what importance do you give to the fact that William Foy was a man of color?
Well, I believe
at that time.
I believe that God wanted to use.
That was even before the emancipation of slaves, and so that's saying something.
It was a huge thing that he struggled with. He struggled with it. And if you read the book, it says he used the phrase. He said it became very crossing to me to do it, very difficult. The first vision, he's got 4 visions. Ellen White says he's got 4 visions. The first vision was very similar to her first vision. In fact, some people have kind of compared the two. The first vision, he said he felt that he wanted to share it, but the guy didn't tell him that he must share the vision. The second vision, though, of judgment, first one was the new earth. The second was of judgment. He said the guy specifically told him, you must share what you have seen. And then he did it after that. So he did, in fact, share it after that. And the third vision was in the platforms, the 3 platforms. We don't know what the fourth one was about. We don't have a record of that. He does have a book out, though. Not a book. It's more like a pamphlet. William Foy. It's called The Christian Experience of William Ellis Foy. And that's included in my new book. I put in the appendix.
I see.
So it is there. But no, it's a fascinating story, and I think it shows that God used a black man, a white man, and a woman. So I think he's very multicultural.
Absolutely.
He was very open, and he was using all people.
So much ahead of the times.
Absolutely.
So much ahead of the times.
And I think it was just a simple way of showing the fact that God was not prejudiced, even though the times we were living in the 1840s. I mean, the Civil War was ended in 1865, and they were emancipated around that same time. So it showed that God was even then sending the signal that this Revelation 14 message that goes to all people, nations, and around the world, all means all diverse groups, not simply one particular group. So while primarily the Adventist Church was started by Anglos on the eastern seaboard of the United States, he didn't want to end there. So this was just the beginning point and spreading from that point.
Let's spend the next 5 minutes on your time at Oakwood as president. And because you mentioned already Ellen White, she was personally involved in the birth, in the vision leading to the establishing of Oakwood.
Well, my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, was on the communication techniques of Ellen White
Really?
in initiating the black work in the South. So basically what I did was my thesis, my basic point was that it was Ellen White's effectiveness as a communicator that caused the church to initiate and to maintain the work in the southern part of the United States. And so that's where I started. And as a result of that, for the many hours I spent there, I have gone, and then being president there, I was so caught with how involved Ellen White, the prophetess, was in building this work in the South, and Oakwood University, Oakwood College then, or it was really called Oakwood Emmanuel School and then Industrial School later. But it was so remarkable to me, Pastor, that this lady, who was so gifted and so blessed of God, and who I love in my ministry, Ellen White is just a center part of my ministry, that she took time out of her schedule to be sure that the work in the South started. And her son, as you know, Edson White, was the key person that really started the work in the 1890s.
Taking great risks at that time for what he was doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the Morning Star boat, the very boat itself, many people don't realize this, but he was very creative, Edson White was.
To avoid being caught.
That's right.
To take students on the ship.
That's right.
And teaching them, and then going to another place, another place,
right.
another place.
Ron Grable has a great book, Message to Black America. He has great stories in there. And even my son Benjamin has a book called Crucial Moments. And he talks about vignettes in that period. So if the readers or your viewers are interested, they can read more about that. But anyway, basically, Ellen White was invested in the work in the South and Oakwood. And it was a result of her insistence that the General Conference started the work in 1896. They bought this slave plantation and made it into a university. You probably heard about that when you interviewed them.
Sure.
Just a great story. Ellen White was back and forth to Oakwood. She went there at least 4 times, and she would go to their board meeting, and she would make these messages. And
sometimes strong messages, because the leadership was very slow in catching the vision. And
she personally gave money to the work in the South and to Oakwood. She put it in her will, in her last rites, that she put in there the fact that
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that the black work would profit from some of her proceedings and proceeds from her estate. So she was very much invested in it, and the school, her idea was that her son Edson White was doing what he called holy schools or mission schools in the South, the Vicksburg, the Yazoo River area. And he'd start these schools, but there was nowhere for the students to go because they couldn't go to white schools.
Sure.
And so it was her idea that the GC should start this institution there, and they could train the graduates of the mission school where her son was. Now let me just give you a little vignette here that you might find interesting. In 1891, well, prior to 1891, it was James White and Uriah Smith and the other church leaders were abolitionists. So they were against slavery. Ellen White also played the role of being against the fugitive slave law. She says the Adventists should not follow that and return slaves if they had run away to the masters.
Which was kind of civil disobedience.
It was. It was very, very powerful, very courageous on her part. But in 1891, at the General Conference session in Battle Creek, they probably had about 37, 38 people attending. She made a presentation called Our Duty to the Colored People. And it's in the book Southern Work. And if anyone is interested, any of the viewers are interested, they can read that chapter, and there they will see outlined her view toward not simply black people or colored people, but any minority group in the world. And I found in that chapter, it's a seminal chapter, that no matter where you are in the world, no matter what part, if you're moving into new areas, you can use principles from that Our Duty to the Colored People chapter, and it will help you to know in. It was after she made that presentation that the GC, and some scholars and historians theorize that this is true. After that session, when she made the presentation at the GC session, the GC brethren says, we think Ellen White needs to go to the mission field. I'm serious. I mean, it sounds kind of humorous, but in some people say, what are you reading into that? Ellen White said that when the brethren, after her presentation, she was pushing them about this black work business. Ellen White said that when the brethren voted her to go to Australia, she wept. She cried. And she said she had received no light from God that God wanted her to do that. She said, but because the GC committee has voted it, I will do it.
Yeah.
And so she went there, but again, talking about providence, Ellen White went there, and it was one of the most remarkable
Yes.
things that could have happened. I theorized when I was writing about the black
Yes.
work in my dissertation that God put her there as a haven and gave her a safe haven. Because it was from Australia from 1891 until the turn of the century, around
Yes.
1900,
Yes.
that she wrote a series of articles to Edson White,
Yes.
which comprise Southern work of today. And I mean, Pastor, if you read those messages in Southern work, I mean, they're so powerful on how to start the work in different parts of the world, how to deal with opposition, how to connect with the power of God during these difficult missions. And I'm convinced that God put her there so she could safely write to Edson. And as a result of Edson receiving these messages, his wife Emma and Edson and Will Palmer were on the Morning Star boat. Those are the three primary ones. And they asked Edson once, they said, how is it that you're able to be so successful in the South when others before you were not quite as successful? He wasn't the first one, but he was the most successful one. And he said, well, because I receive good counsel and I follow it. And it was the letters that his mother had been sending him
From Australia.
from Australia. And he, put a lot of them in the Gospel Herald magazine that he printed on the Morning Star boat. And he was just so creative. So Ellen White was involved in his work in Oakwood University. And so as a result of that, Oakwood has strong foundational roots in the prophetic ministry of the church because of Ellen White. And when I was there, we created 17 markers on the campus, 17 historical markers that essentially say the historical point happened here, happened there, all around the campus. You can see these spots. And really that's, to this day, I think it's just a prime, beautiful spot. And my goal, my 14 years there was I wanted this to be a point of excellence, a spot of excellence. And God really blessed us. So during my time there, we expanded it by some 7, 8 buildings. We went from a college to a university in 2008. We raised literally millions of dollars there in building the plant, and to this day, you can see that it's a very blessed and a very special place. Your viewers, if they ever go to the southern part of the United States, they ought to drop by Huntsville, Alabama, and see Oakwood University.
Wonderful. At that time, you have also been asked to participate in some important meetings at the high level, national level, government,
Oh, yes.
and presidency on education for the
Absolutely.
For the
I was a
black
part of the
people.
White House Initiative for
Yes.
historically black colleges
That
under
was
Bush,
very
George Bush.
interesting,
And so I was very much involved in the legislative part. I appeared before Congress several times
Yes.
and made different parts for different initiatives for our colleges. And Sheila Jackson Lee, a Seventh Adventist
She's
congresswoman,
now-
was very helpful with
yeah,
that
yeah.
as well as Roscoe Bartlett. He's I think he retired since then, but he also was very helpful. No, I did that there. Then I did a lot of state organizations, volunteer organizations. I was involved in many educational sections. But probably, I think maybe if I were to give the top 4 or 5 things with Oakwood, equal to that, though, was what we talked about before, and that's the Running for Scholarship program.
Well, so you do research, you have your PhD, you are a university president, you go speaking before the Congress, and so you publish books, and so many things, scholarly things. What is the place of running marathons in such an academic life?
Because we want to be holistic.
Holistic.
We want to be holistic, and no matter how scholarly or how much academia you're involved in, a person needs balance. And so in the years there, my wife being a physical therapist, I've always been kind of a health enthusiast. And I believe in healthful living. So when I was running these marathons starting in 1988.
So, but running marathons, which of course is one of the most exerting and exploits in
well,
athletics.
it is.
Yeah. But you started quite late in life, 90?
I was, I was around 30-ish, give or take something, and I was, my first marathon was a Marine Corps marathon in Washington, D.C. I run 54 marathons all total, and my goal was to do all 50 states. I've done 36 of the 50 states.
36. So you have to keep
14
fit.
more to go. I mean, that's true. But when I was at Oakwood, I said, I need to get a goal that I can complete. And so therefore the goal was to run all marathons on all the 7 continents. And so I raise money. My wife being a physical
But how do you
therapist.
raise money? By running marathons, how do you raise money? Because you have to pay a fee, you have to travel there, you spend money. How to raise money by doing marathons?
Well, here's a great principle for your viewers. I mean, I think anyone who has a project and has a dream, people can help you do it. And so my project or dream was I wanted to raise money. I wanted to be helpful and set a good example for the students, start a health program on campus. And I knew that I had limited funds. So how could I do all this? My wife suggested, she said, well, Delbert, why don't you, if you're going to be crazy enough to run marathons, which 42 kilometers or 26.2 miles, it's a long ways.
As an expert, I think she's not very, very, I don't think you have her approval for such long...
Well, she thought that it was very, very, kind of pushing it to do that.
Too much.
She knew that I loved it, so she said, at least raise money when you're doing it.
Yeah, how?
So I got with the development department at Oakwood.
Yes.
And we said, okay, we'll get sponsors. For every mile I run, people would pay. And I happened to run across a guy who also did it for the March of Dimes. So we had that idea in mind that if you run a marathon, people give you $1 or $10 per mile if you finish, and all the money would go to the school. I also knew that the Oakwood may not be so liking the idea of paying money to fly around the world to run marathons. So I worked it out with Florida Hospital. I said, okay, if I run under your logo, Creation Health, will you pay for the expenses? And they said, fine. So I used Creation Health logo, and they paid for all my races. And so it didn't go to the school. And so I set a good example, and we had what we called President's Ambassadors. So we had a group of students on the campus who we trained every year, and they also would run with me, and they also be health models. So we try to set example for the campus. I started off, Pastor, and I remember the first race, I raised $3,000, which was okay. I said, I can make some money at this. Then we went to $10,000, and then we had a company who sponsored us $1,000 a mile, $26,000 for a marathon, $26,200, 26.2 miles. Then I was really enthused, and I was caught up in it. I said, we can make money at this thing. This really can work. And so then I began to run the continents. I did Australia, and I did Europe, and I did Africa, and then I did, South America, Santiago, Chile. And, and then I knew I had to run the South.
High altitude.
High altitude, yes.
Did you feel a difference?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Oh, no, just the altitudes make a big difference. And so I had to kind of prepare for different ways for different races. But then I knew I had to run the South Pole. The South Pole, on the way to the South Pole, the bottom of the world, I went to Santiago in Vina del Mar. Okay, so in South America, not far from Santiago, I ran the race there, and then a week later I ran the one in the South Pole.
Oh, you mean both of them in quick succession?
I got to a point where I was running so many marathons, I could do multiple marathons. Really? I could do 2 in a week. And it got to a point, it was almost like a second nature then. My height was in 2008. That was my best year. I ran, actually, would you believe this is true? I ran 13 years in 2008. 13 marathons, I should say.
Wow.
13 marathons in 2008. I would never do that again. I never did it before, never did it afterwards. But I did that many, and I raised in that year, I think I raised $200,000 in that year alone, just that. So what happened was the South Pole Marathon, when I did that, I raised $85,000 in that 2008 year. And I said, this is fantastic. Then I did all 7 continents. Well, in running these marathons, the people told me, they said, listen, Baker, if you've done 7 marathons, to really be good, to do the ultimate record is do the Grand Slam, which is running the North Pole, which is not a continent.
Sure.
North Pole Marathon, which is a slab of ice 3 months out of the year.
I told you that I read you ran the North Pole Marathon, and I said to myself, that should be a mistake.
No.
On what to run in the North Pole?
The Russians are very creative. The Russians, they have what they call an exotic marathon. It's very expensive. They fly you to Longyearbyen in Norway, and then from there they jump over to a special plane to a slab of ice there. We did it in December, the beginning of December. And you have to get off because in January the ice starts cracking, and eventually it goes away, So they have a 4-mile course around and around until you get 26.2 miles. It's about to go crazy. It was the hardest marathon of all because when I did it, I remember I was almost hallucinating. It was so cold.
Really?
I had 3 layers of clothing on.
Yeah, you have to protect
mask
again.
and hat and goggles and face masks and thermal socks and special shoes. But I mean, I'm telling you, it was so cold out there. The wind chill factor was 32 degrees below zero. I began to see things. I thought I saw angels and horses. I even thought I saw my wife. So I knew I was hallucinating.
Wow.
But anyway, that was just incredible race. When I finished, I was so tired, I never can. But listen, even though I was very impressed, even better than what I did, there was a guy there from England. His name was Oscar. He fought in the Falkland Wars and lost his sight. And his BHAG, or his big, hairy, audacious goal, or his bucket list item, something he wanted to do in life, was he wanted to run the North Pole, but he couldn't see. So he got a friend of his who ran the race with him, and they had a little rope. I have a picture of him, a little rope, and he held the end of it, and they just ran it, and he completed the race. Fantastic. It was so wonderful. And I never will forget, I was so inspired by him. I mean, come on, if he could do it, anybody could do it, or they should do it. And I finished the race, and Mark Finley said, Delbert, when you're doing all these races, especially with the South Pole and the North Pole, he said, you ought to finish with the Bible. He told me to take the Bible with me, he said, and so that would be a great witness. So if you see the picture in the Adventist Review, when they show me running the South Pole, and I have a Bible with me.
Fantastic.
I have the American flag, and then I have the Bible. That I carried it with me when I finished. But I'll summarize it by saying that my goal for that race in the North Pole was $150,000. Well, I remember going back to my board after the race and said to him, I said, well, my goal was $150,000. I said, but I only raised $140,000. And one of my board members, I never will forget her, she said, well, listen, Dr. Baker, if you've done that much, I'll write a check out for $10,000 right here. So she wrote a check for $10,000, and I got the goal. So when I left Oakwood in 2010, literally cash dollars in the bank, $500,000, called Running for Scholarship. They use it, they just leave the principal there, and they just use the interest for students for scholarship from now on. Yeah. So praise God. So I'll summarize it by saying that I think ministry is like an adventure. And my ministry has been an adventure. It's like, when Christ was talking to Nicodemus, he said the Holy Spirit is like the wind. No man knows where it's coming and going. And I think that's where our lives are. If we live a life in Christ and we trust God, He'll take us where He wants us to go. And so where I am right now at AUA, I think it's a part of God's adventure for my life, and I'm cooperative. Whatever He wants me to do, I'm willing to do it.
Thank you very much. That gives us the best conclusion for our conversation. And let me add, I can't wait to interview you again.
Oh, God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Andre,
Thank you.
pleasure,
God
pleasure,
bless you
pleasure.
and your mission here.
Thank you.